Of course, my parents were like, no, you get a proper job and whatever. But I had a conversation with a friend back then, and he just told me pretty much to just listen to my heart and not be so logical about it and fear-driven, because I brought all these arguments against, but it's going well now. What if, it doesn't go well in a year? And then I kind of neglected looking for jobs. So it was just like very security oriented. And he was like, no, man, just listen to your heart. You're passionate about music. You got to give this a try.
Welcome back to another episode of Tapasya Loading. As you'll hear during this conversation, it's been a while since I caught up with my friend and ex-collaborator of sorts, Robert Koch. It was an enormous pleasure to finally get to have the chance to do that after 7 years. As most of our conversations here, it kind of speaks for itself. I just want to take a minute out there to thank Robert again for coming on. I hope you enjoy the uninterrupted show. Before that though, I do want to point you towards this free gift, which I still offer on my coaching website, holisticpianoacademy.com. It's a free practice log, which I've used over the years for both my music practice, my yoga practice, my workout practices. It's a very simple system that just works without necessarily getting too granular about your schedule, but also managing to keep the kind of focus you need. It speaks for itself. Just go try it out. Really, truly. There's no catch to it. Just go to holisticpianoacademy.com, wait for the pop-up, download. Alright, without much further ado, Robert Koch. Hello fellow beings, welcome to Tapasya Loading, a safe space to attempt honest, raw and authentic conversation in homage to the ancient act of stoking a sacred fire. How you been?
It's been so long, right? I mean, when was that? 2013?
2013, man, way too long. I did not intend it to be this long.
I know, it's crazy. But it was quite a pivotal moment, I gotta say, because when we linked up in, where was it? Bangalore or
Chennai?
What was the city that Chennai, that's where it was, yeah. So that was just before I moved to Los Angeles, actually.
Exactly.
So that was that transitional thing. I went to India and then I went back to Berlin after India. And then shortly after that, I flew to LA and pretty much just moved there.
I remember.
So the whole India experience was very crazy for me and new. And it was also a transitional phase between Berlin and LA. So that was cool. Very interesting that we connect now 7 years later.
I know, right? At a phase where everyone's going through transitions at some level or the other.
Yep, very true.
How has the pandemic been treating you?
Pandemic, I gotta say, I lucked out because, like many artists, I was forced to cancel my tours, which was not the lucky part. But I found myself in the studio, unable to tour. I just had released a record. We actually lined up some cool shows with a philharmonic orchestra, which would have been a very cool tour to do in philharmonic venues.
Oh, man.
None of this happened. It all fell flat on its face. I was very disappointed. So I was in my studio and was like, what the hell am I going to do? But then I was lucky because a music supervisor that I worked with previously called me up and he was like, do you want to work on this TV show that we're working on? And I was like, oh my God, this is exactly what I need to be doing right now. Just give me something that I can work on that can just keep me afloat financially too. And so that's how I say I was lucky, because this thing came right at the moment where I needed it.
Awesome, man. I'm super happy for you.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to respect your time. I know you're a very busy man. I know we want to keep this as focused as possible to get your story across to my listeners in a manner that's digestible. So I want to kind of trace back your musical journey back to Kreuzberg before Kreuzberg became what it is today globally. Or maybe even earlier to your childhood in Kassel, depending on what you prefer to be more relevant.
I'm totally easy with whatever you choose to. You guide this whole thing, and I just follow along.
Oh, don't be so sure I got this. I'm just I'm just a musician, just hanging with my friends, and
Cool. We can just keep it conversational.
Absolutely. For my listeners, I do want to let them know how I met you, because
Yeah.
that for me was a very, very interesting and pivotal point for my musical journey as well.
Right.
We toured India together for the Goethe Institute, wherein we did a week-long workshop at a conservatory.
That's right, yeah.
And then played at this very diverse festival, which we both kind of, struggled to find our space in.
Yeah, it was very eclectic.
I know, right? We were like, wow, exactly where do we stand here?
Uh-huh.
And I also remember for me too, it was also a time of a deep transition, because I was kind of figuring out where exactly even I want to go with my music. I just finished music college and had a lot of academic baggage I was carrying with, you know how that is. Like you mentioned, right after you moved on to Los Angeles, and I kind of saw your career explode on the international expanse as well. I mean, you were always what we call the Geheimtipp in Germany. I remember attending your concert at a place in Mannheim, and I remember. Yeah, and
it's
I remember
crazy,
I was there with a friend who's like a completely different genre. She was a musician herself, and she was like, "Wow, this guy is like blowing me away." And
that's cool. Because I don't even remember that part.
I remember this is the Alte Feuerwache. There's this venue, and it's also very rare for, at least in my experience, for a music producer to blow people away with the live performances the way you did. At least for me, it was a very, very unique experience. I'd like to get into that, actually, your attitude towards live concerts.
Yeah.
Let's start with this. What's your earliest memory of music, man?
Oldest memory of music? That must have been in the car with my mom picking me up from school or whatever, and her playing Face Value by Phil Collins on tape in the car.
I love Phil Collins, though.
Me too.
High five.
I love him so much. And that epic drum fill from In the Air Tonight.
Fuck yeah.
I was like, this was pre-me understanding music, but I was always like, wow, where does this come from, It's just like this synth pad, and it's all like gloomy, and then there's this thunderous fill, which I didn't quite compute at the time. But it did impress me a lot.
Yeah, I love Phil Collins. But I remember one of my earliest mentors used to say, like, from that whole Genesis lineup, there were so many musicians. Peter Gabriel, for example, has always been celebrated for one of the most innovative musicians in the world of pop and so on, which is obviously, needless to say, absolutely true. But I remember my teacher used to say, and he was a drummer himself, he said, what, Phil Collins, when he sings a song, maybe it's not all, experimental in, the way a music critic would define it. But when Phil Collins plays a song, it will touch you.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, hands down, I'm not even ashamed to say that I like Phil Collins.
No.
Because it's obviously something that, a lot of people associate with like cheesy 80s radio music.
Yeah.
But he wrote some good songs. And I mean, he knew the craft, and he knew exactly how to connect emotionally. So,
exactly.
Yeah, both as a drummer and as a songwriter / performer, I think he is a great man. He's still alive, of course. So yeah, that's something that I don't even call a guilty pleasure. I'm just like, hands down, Phil Collins.
Right there with you, man. Hard relate. I completely agree. I've always been. I found this classification of his music being cheesy a little unfair. I'm not. I mean, to each their own, and needless to say. But yeah, I'm totally down with you, man. I'm stoked to have a fellow fan of Phil Collins.
Absolutely.
Where did you go take it from there?
So, yeah, my mom was pretty much my exposure to music, because my dad was never really into music. It was always something that happened in the background on the radio or whatever. He didn't really connect with music. And to this day, he's like struggling to understand what it is that I do exactly, because I think he doesn't have a relationship to music so much. So he can't quite, he's happy for me that I'm successful at whatever that is that I'm doing, but I don't think he can understand it as much as my mom does, who's more passionate about music. But her music taste is very much, like Motown, Stevie Wonder. I mean, she did like Phil Collins, but mainly it was like this kind of soul, R&B kind of stuff, which I was exposed to as a kid because I was around the house and she would play these records a lot.
Sweet.
And that was cool with me because I liked it. I still like Temptations and all that, Isaac Hayes. But when my teenage years kicked in, I needed to sort of find my own identity around that and not just listen to the music my mom listened to or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I got into pretty extreme guitar music, which my mom hated. And I learned the drums, and I was playing in metal bands. I was a drummer in a death metal band age 15.
Wait,
So that
what?
was
You
just
were a drummer in a death metal band?
I was, yeah. I was like double bass, everything, blast
Damn.
beats.
Badass.
There was, yeah. I mean, my education has been very eclectic too. So
That's
I moved
awesome.
on from metal because what drew me in was the technicality too. Like it's very difficult and very high speeds to play this kind of stuff. But then I realized, oh, there's also jazz, and jazz on the drums also is really demanding and technical and expressive. So I got into jazz. Not that I was like a great jazz drummer, but I listened to John Coltrane and all these records that a friend turned me on to, and that just opened up a whole new horizon. Because first it was like Metallica and Slayer and all that, and then there was like John Coltrane, Moondog, you name it. Even classical stuff, Steve Reich. So I just discovered so much music. This was around when I was like 17.
Mm-hmm.
That I got really into crate digging, meaning to say going to record stores and digging for obscure, whatever, krautrock or jazz records, and then just really got into just like knowing a lot, like music trivia, like where does this come from, who sampled this. So just got really interested in all that, and this brought me into producing, because from crate digging and like sampling and hip hop, I got into making beats, and from beat making, the next step was just producing my own music, which was not just me being a drummer in a band.
Wow, that is so reassuring and so heartwarming to hear, man. That kind of you obviously felt some common thread between all these apparently different genres.
Yes, I think the common thread was always originality and like a interesting sonical expression. Because even in metal, it's a very intense kind of sound. And that, just like the sonics of it, always fascinated me. And then the same is true for any other kind of genre, where there's just a genuine emotional expression behind it. It could be anything. It could be something really aggressive like it is in metal, or something really soft and heartfelt like in other genres. So I think I just gravitate towards something that just feels real to me and is presented in a way that's challenging my taste buds in a way that I haven't heard this before, just like anything that's new and like, wow, what is this? That always drew my attention.
Stimulation.
Yep, in a way.
Beautiful.
Stimulation of also, yeah, like the unknown. I guess the unknown is always something that fascinated me. And whenever I discovered a new musical universe, so to speak, I was really like, wow, what else is in there? Just like when I touched the tip of jazz or whatever, it's like I was the guy who read all the liner notes. Who's the pianist on this John Coltrane record? Oh, McCoy Tyner, digging for his stuff. Oh, who's that drummer on there? Oh, he has a record out. So it's just like going down the rabbit hole and just like learning to connect all the dots, which I always found really interesting.
That is so awesome, man. In a world where producers and musicians generally are becoming increasingly hyper-focused on their lane, so to speak, do you think that's an approach towards music that's dying out? That diverse, exploration in the beginning without necessarily trying to get anywhere?
I'm not sure, man. I mean, I think we live in a post-genre kind of world, because everything, when I grew up, things were way more segregated and like
really
boxed. Yeah, because, even like when I was a teenager, you were either a punk or you were into metal or you were like into hip hop or whatever. And these things, they didn't quite mingle or interconnect. And I think nowadays it's a little more fluid. There's so many genres that are like hybrids of other genres and cross references. The only thing that I see nowadays, everything seems to be pop, like no matter how weird it is, it's sort of assimilated by the mainstream so quickly, which wasn't so much the case before. I think subcultures don't really exist anymore. I mean, all these genres still exist, of course, but they have gone from being like a, like a special thing that only a few people know about to something that, yeah, of course I know about that, It's just like, I think the internet just made subcultures mainstream everywhere.
What kind of an impact do you think that has on music? The erasure, so to speak, of the underground.
Yeah, I think like a devaluation in a way, because I mean that ties in with like the whole thing with Spotify and streaming and all that. How music is consumed nowadays. A lot of like kids just listen to music on their phones, or they discover music on TikTok, and it's always like related to something else. Like, let's say there's a dance competition on TikTok and there's a cool song around it, so they discover the song. It could even be an older song. But it's not so much about the artist that they don't really, I'm not saying they don't care, but what draws them in is not so much the actual song. It's more the song is being used for something, it's being used for an advert, or it's being used in like a TikTok gaming or dance competition or who knows what, So I'm not going to say that devalues music necessarily, because it just puts it in another context. But it doesn't put music first anymore. It's not just the song where you go like, oh my God, what is that?
Yeah.
Who is that? Who else? Where does this come from? What is this whole scene that this artist emerges from? That might still exist, that people care, but I feel like people care a little less than they used to. That's just my observation. They take it for granted, that's what I mean. It's just something that's there. They just turn on Spotify and the playlist is in the background, and then the rest is a little less important.
Yeah, I hear you. That's very well said, actually. Is this a good time to reflect upon the earlier days in Berlin?
Sure.
Because it sounds like that would have been a good contrast to the situation you just described.
It was, but also Berlin, when I moved there in 99, it was a different place than it is today, of course.
Oh, yeah.
There was more of this DIY subculture, which Berlin still stands for, but now it's almost like the poster of that. You go to a club or a bar, and they make it look like it's improvised, only because that's, you know what I mean. It's more like the look. So it's like the Bar 25 knockoff or whatever.
Yep.
When back in the day these things were improvised, because they were just like, I don't know, like an after hour would just go as long as it went, And nowadays the after hours, they're already planned with like the DJs up until like 2 p.m. or whatever. Back in the day, it was more spontaneous, Maybe it was over at 5, maybe it went on till who knows when. It was a little less institutionalized, maybe.
It's like a Berlin package now.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that comes with the expectation too, because a lot of people move to Berlin or visit Berlin with that kind of image in mind. So the city kind of wants to live up to that image, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that, you just get what you came to find. But you're not surprised anymore, because you're just pretty much pleased by whatever the expectation that needed to be pleased is, and then that just happens. So I don't see so much innovation in that, when people just come with a certain expectation and they just want to tick that box. Yeah, I did that whole Berghain thing, and I did the after hour here, and that's so Berlin, whatever.
Yeah.
Just feels a little contrived nowadays.
Yeah. I was about to say, you ask if the word predictable would be too harsh a description, but yeah, you say contrived. I unfortunately have to kind of agree with you, even though I didn't live in Berlin. I've always had a relationship with the city.
Yeah.
Please tell us more. What were your earliest impressions of Berlin? Tell us more about your relationship, how it's been over the years.
I mean, it was a good relationship, because I started making music out there. Well, I didn't start in Berlin, but it started paying my rent in Berlin. That's when I started playing shows. I was in this band Jacuzzi with Sasha Pereira, who now goes under Pereira elsewhere.
Yeah.
So we had this. Yeah, you remember. So we had this band together, and it was cool. We played like small like locations, like Eimer, which doesn't exist anymore. It's a shoe shop now. So it was a very fun and.
You produced the band, right?
Yeah, I was the
Yeah.
producer and I played live. I played the keys live, and it was a fun time. We played a lot around Europe also.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so this was interesting because for the first time I could see music as a profession. Because before it was always a passion,
Mm-hmm.
and it continued being a passion, but now it also started paying my bills. And that was also another pivotal moment because I remember I studied marketing and communication science. And I finished my studies, and then I needed to decide whether I just go and work in the field that I studied for,
Mm-hmm.
or if I continue making music full time. Of course, my parents were like, no, 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 you get a proper job and whatever. But I had a conversation with a friend back then, and he just told me pretty much to just listen to my heart and not be so logical about it and fear driven, because I brought all these arguments against, yeah, but it's going well now. What if, it doesn't go well in a year? And then I kind of neglected looking for jobs. So it was just like very security orientated. And he was like, no, man, just listen to your heart. You're passionate about music. You got to give this a try. And I'm so glad I did, because I think a lot of people don't listen to that.
I want more friends like that.
Yeah, you need these friends. And I'm very grateful. Shout outs to Moritz, if you ever listen to this. You know who you are.
Thank you, Moritz.
I mean, these things are important, because
Absolutely.
as an artist and a creative person, we tend to get insecure about what we do.
Yes.
And especially at the verge of a career which is just about to begin, and you don't know if this is going to go anywhere. But you never know. Even nowadays, I don't know if this is going well, or if it could go better or whatever.
Absolutely.
All I'm saying is there's always doubts. Whatever level you're at, you always question whether you're doing the best you can, or if this is what you should be doing. But you just learn to listen to the doubts a little less and just trust your intuition more. Mm-hmm. So that's something that I learned over the years, because those doubts, they always creep up and they're always going to be there. But yeah, I guess the most, what's the word I'm looking for? The most reliable thing is your gut feeling.
That is very, very humbling and very inspiring to hear from a musician and artist from your stature. Thanks for sharing that, man.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm glad to hear that also, because it's never easy, because it's such a fine and small voice, if you will, your intuition, and it's so much fainter than your logical mind, which always has like very good arguments for or against something. But to kind of like phase all of that out and just tune into that inner knowing where you have the answer inside of you already. Just got to quiet the mind enough to hear it, So that's actually something that meditation helped me with. And that's something I tapped into fast forward to Los Angeles now. I was way more anxious in Berlin. And I'm not saying that's because of the city necessarily, but that's just how it was for me. And also the people I was around. I think moving to Los Angeles grounded me a lot more.
Yes, I've heard it tends to do that to a lot of people.
Maybe, yeah.
California,
I think
generally.
That's what I think. I'm not going to say it's LA necessarily as a city, because that's also very confusing and expensive and demanding in many ways. But California as a place, the nature of it, and maybe also the culture, with the whole hippie movement in the 70s. And I don't know what, there's something grounding and healing about it. Just being there and around certain people that just, makes you think a little differently about stuff. And I certainly reconsidered a lot of things and just tackled some of my insecurities and from a different perspective. So it was a healing experience moving over there.
Beautiful. Would you want to share a little more about these experiences?
Sure. I mean, mainly it was opening up because also what needs to be said, when I moved to LA, I had a relationship breakup with a then girlfriend who we were together for like 5 years. She broke up with me. I also stopped working with my management at the time. So it was a moment where a lot of bridges were burning and I didn't feel like anything holds me back in Berlin.
Wow.
Which helped me to also leave the city, because I felt tired of Berlin already after 10 years. But I sort of hung out a little longer. I always give the comparison of a lukewarm bath. You're taking a bath and it's not quite warm anymore, but it's still comfortable enough to still hang out in it.
Fantastic analogy.
Yeah. It was just like comfort zone, but not really inspiring anymore. It's just like, yeah. So I needed that kick in the butt by life, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And I acted on it. I took the opportunity and be like, nothing ties me down to Berlin anymore. I'm out of here. I'm going to move somewhere where I don't know anyone, and where just, again, my gut feeling tells me I should go and find out what intrigues me about it. So I did, and I think life rewards you when you kind of take these leaps of faith sometimes. And you just meet the right people. It felt very fluid and very it just felt very natural. I just ran into the right people that introduced me to the other right people, both in music but also spiritually. I ended up in a meditation retreat with a guru from the Himalayas,
wow.
which was my first meditation retreat I've ever done. So it was a big introduction to meditation for me. And these kind of things, they all came to me sort of naturally. I guess I was looking for them subconsciously, but sometimes you just got to open up for opportunities to come your way,
I remember you delving into a spiritual life, or at least meditation practices while you were in India during that tour.
Mm-hmm.
I remember it was written about you.
Absolutely. And that's interesting that you say that, because Monica Dogra, remember her?
Yeah.
She was one of the singers that performed at the festival in Rajasthan, Magnetic Fields.
Yeah.
She put me in touch with a guy called Krishna out in LA, who actually brought me to that monk, the Himalayan monk that I ended up having my first meditation experience with.
Nice.
Or like the more profound meditation, which was like a full-on 3-day retreat of only meditation.
Mm-hmm.
And that was through her. So like you could say that my travels to India kind of kicked off my interest there, and then she kind of guided me in the right direction and connected me with someone in LA. So yeah, it's interesting how these things work sometimes.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, India and California have had a relationship with each other for generations now. I'm not sure if you're aware of this.
Yeah, I am actually. Yeah.
So, what was that like? Was that? I mean, meditation is it's a very universal thing. It's not necessarily. At least I've always thought it's not really. People usually associate it with the East, and maybe it has been presented in a certain manner, which might kind of stand testimony to that. But it's a very, needless to say, I mean, universally applicable template or practice. Was that? How were your experiences with that? I know it's like almost like a oxymoron to try and describe that feeling, because the entire idea is to kind of transcend the realm of words.
Yeah, I mean, really, what it is for me, it's just like being a little more grounded in my body and less up there in my thoughts, and getting carried away with thoughts and emotions and identifying with them. Mm-hmm. So it's just like seeing the emotions and the thoughts, but not identifying with them as much. So you can just like let them pass easier. And you also feel there's this entity that you are that connects you to everything else, which is a very reassuring and grounding feeling that makes everything that happens in your life a little less significant. I'm not saying that it's insignificant. Of course, we live worldly lives, and
sure.
They matter, but at the same time, they don't. This whole, you said oxymoron, in a way, this whole almost contradiction of, also in yoga, like one of my teachers used to say, the pose is everything and the pose is nothing. And I was like, what does that mean? I don't understand.
Oh, that's so well said. Who's this teacher?
This guy called Billy. He used to work at Earth Yoga. It doesn't exist anymore. Unfortunately, they closed down in Silver Lake. Yeah, but he was a very cool guy. And these kind of things, just like letting my mind chew on that thing for a while, the pose is nothing and the pose is everything. That's almost like a koan in Zen Buddhism, where they give you these weird riddles for your mind, like what's the sound of one hand clapping and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
And that's actually really cool, because you contemplate these things. You don't really solve them with your mind, but eventually you just like sort of get it, almost like non-intellectually.
Yeah.
And that's what meditation is to me. It's just not something that happens overnight. It's just something that you keep visiting and revisiting, and it teaches you something over time, and it's subtle, it's very subtle, but it's profound.
So that space it facilitates your entrance into. Is it something you remember getting a taste for through music before you actually discovered meditation as a practice? I've always been curious about that aspect to musicians who also have a spiritual life.
What do you mean? Like how it affected my music, or?
No, actually the other way around. Like in my case, just to share some of my personal experiences.
Sure, please go ahead.
In a way, when I don't really remember when I started meditating. It's kind of, the practices is something I grew up with as a result of my heritage. But I do remember that, that space of safety or transcendence, or just, beyond the neurotic mind or the rational mind, where you're observing yourself in that human form. It is a space music has always also kind of, hinted at all my life.
Interesting.
Except music is always just a different modality to use to, entrance, a different modality entrance into the same space. So it's like the same arena you're entering, but with different gates.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally relate to what you're saying, and I actually agree, because the closest I've come to experiencing these transcending or like flow state kind of moments are music, of course,
Sweet.
But it's the kind of moment where you just like don't realize time anymore, when you're working on music. Exactly. And it's just like you're improvising or whatever.
Bingo.
You're like literally somewhere else. You're like, that you could call transcending, you're like time and space sort of disappear, and you're just like, wow, how did 4 hours just pass? And I was just in this in this vortex of ideas and whatever that was.
Bingo. Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to...
But you also said it very well, because it's a different modality. It's not, because in meditation I feel you kind of phase out a lot of the stuff, you just like sit there and it's more quiet and it's more introvert. With music, it's more expressionistic. I don't know, maybe there's meditations that give you that, but I can just share about my meditations, which are more, in the best case, they're more grounding and centering and quieting. Mm-hmm. So it's like quieting the mind and just breathing and all that, whereas music can be very invigorating and crazy. And you know what I mean? It's Absolutely. Just like a wormhole that takes you to a different dimension, but it's very active, but it's not this kind of busy brain kind of active, not when you're lying in bed, you can't sleep and you have like this, mind chatter going on. It's different, your body is maybe still relaxed, but it's also invigorated. It's a different modality. You said it very well. I can only repeat what you said.
Yeah, it was only an extension of what you were hinting at anyway. Also, another thing I can't help but wonder is part of the collateral damage of being a professional musician is it comes with baggage. So I don't know about you, but sometimes I'll come close to getting into a somewhat meditative state through music, and then my little self will start saying, "Yeah, man, but what do you think your piano teacher would think of what you just played? Or
right,
what's the use of being in this state? Can you actually make a song which would get you 20 likes on your social media thing or something?" and shit like that. So
I know. No, I mean, that's the other reality of it. But I mean, that's, if you connect that to meditation, that's exactly the part we need to quiet down a little bit, because that's, the ego that always feels like it needs more or lacks something, and, definitely always lacks attention. And that's what Instagram and all these social medias trigger in us so well. And that's why they're so successful, because we always want more of the engagement and the whole feeling of like what I do matters and other people care about it. It's important, we're human beings, so we're social beings too. So I don't want to say this is bad, and it's never the intention of any spiritual practice to defeat the ego, because we live with an ego, and has a very good purpose, also evolutionary, to keep us going as a species, But at the same time, we shouldn't identify with it too much. So I guess it's always about the balance of identifying this needy ego that wants the likes or wants the attention or feels like it's not getting enough or whatever. Just like noticing that, but also not buying into that too much, So being like, yeah, I see you. You want that. It's okay.
I'm very glad
You know, it's like the way you would deal with a child, maybe, because it's a very childish need, all of this. And then that's at the same time that makes it sort of more likable, because a child is like that and it wants these things and it wants, it's needy and it needs things now and not then or whatever. So children are like encapsulations of small egos, if you will. But at the same time, they're very endearing, of course. You can't mind them to be the way they are. And that's the way I tend to think about my ego sometimes. I try to embrace this a little more rather than trying to kill it or whatever, because it's there. We're part of a singular manifested being, all of us, so we're also part of something bigger, of course. But the fact that we're singular manifestations, it just comes with an ego and we just got to deal with it. It's just learning how to deal with it is what takes a little time and patience.
Love it. Yeah. Yeah, I'm very glad you say that, because there has been a tendency in certain circles to kind of make the ego out to be some devil who's out to get us. That's really not the way it works.
Yeah, I agree.
Also, ego is also almost like the other side of self-respect. The reason we put in the hours to get good at what we do.
Very good point.
Improve our skills, improve our craftsmanship.
The whole aspect of self-care.
There's that.
It's so important as an artist also to cater to your needs. And that's not necessarily egotistical or whatever, Sometimes it's just
not at all.
It allows for the creativity to come through if you take care of yourself. Indeed. Also physically,
Yes, very much so.
Sometimes taking a pause is the best advice I can give to people who ask me about like workflow and whatever. I'm like, make sure you stand up from your desk regularly and maybe go for a walk. That sounds like a very small advice, but it goes a long way. Because there's nothing like stagnant energy when you're just like trying to make this idea work, but it's just not quite happening. And then you try harder and you've been sitting there for 5 hours and you just get frustrated. It's just like, that's not how it's going to go. Get up and revisit it another time. Maybe just exercise or eat some good food or take a bath or whatever. I think that's very important.
So true. I'm very, very glad you say that. There's also this whole, are you familiar with the term spiritual bypassing?
No, never heard of it. What is it?
There is a certain demographic out there who just, usually very close to that demographic, who make the ego out to be the devil.
Okay.
Who will generally just say, everything's just the ego. It's all about just being in the spirit and transcending. Just let everything go. Just don't try to control anything, excuse me. And so what we're basically doing is bypassing our responsibilities to our human selves or to our planetary selves or just, planet Earth.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, there's some spiritual teachers that will tell you are not your body. That might be true in one dimension, but you also you are your body. You know what I mean?
Bingo.
So you can't just neglect the fact that you are inside a body and you are a body too. I mean, that's part of your existence. So
indeed.
I guess what this whole you are not your body thing wants to talk about is that you are not only your body, that people don't identify with how they look like or whatever, or the fact that they age, and that some people get very upset about not looking as good as they used to or whatever, you know what I mean?
Mm.
And that's over-identification with the physical again. And maybe that's where you are not your body should be extended to you are not only your body.
Very well said.
But you are also your body.
Yeah.
So that shouldn't be forgotten about.
It's our instrument to connect to this dimension.
Yes.
Deserves due respect.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm totally with you, man. I agree. First impressions of LA, Berlin to LA, what was that like? I mean, you already kind of hinted at how the experience was.
Yeah, I hinted at it. It was not so much music industry related. It was really just like finding a flow in my life again after the relationship breakup that I had and after all these things where I was like, what do I even do? What do I even want? It was like a restart in many ways. And in a way, it was, like I said earlier, it was very natural. I just happened to quite naturally meet people that I needed to meet at that time, that maybe told me or some things I need to hear or like connected me with other people. So it was very synchronistic in a way, but very subtle also, like I didn't come there with a big agenda, like LA, here I come, I'm going to conquer the movie industry or whatever, it was more like, let me just do a road trip and just like drive to the desert and hang out there for a little bit and look at the stars. That was where.
That is such a refreshing alternate narrative to the quintessential LA story.
Yes, yeah, it was very much not that quintessential. Here I am with the big agents and everything takes off. These things happened later though, but they also happened sort of gradual and natural. It was more like I put out a record and the lady I hired to promote it knew this guy who was through a festival. He really liked my music. The promotional stuff never really did anything. But I'm glad I hired her anyways, because she put me in touch with that guy, who again in turn knew another guy who was an agent for film music, etc. I'm just saying how like around 5 corners everything seems to be connected. And then I ended up signing with a music agent for film composing. I'm just fast forwarding now a little bit, but
sure.
These things all happened partly because I was looking for them, but also because I didn't try very hard to make them work. It was more like I put this out there to the universe, so to speak, that this is something that interests me. And I sort of leave it up to the universe how that's going to be delivered and if that's going to be delivered at all. And then I just sit back and wait. And I just like work a lot, of course. It's not supposed to sound like I'm passive. I'm just like waiting for things to happen. I'm constantly working on my music every day in the studio. It's part of my practice, like a spiritual practice almost. But the results of it or like how it connects, that's something outside of my power in a way. The only thing I can take good care of is like making sure I make the best music that I can make at the time, also within the capacities that I have. And the rest is only something that either happens or doesn't happen. That's my experience. It sounds kind of airy-fairy, but I guess...
Not at all.
Yeah, okay.
Not at all. Quite the contrary, man.
Good.
No, not at all. Actually, it sounds extremely healthy and very, very refreshing.
Cool.
I think it's exactly the kind of message that needs to be talked about more often and spread to fellow artists and musicians.
Yeah, that's an advice I can give. It's like really like make sure you're showing up every day to work on your craft and, also expand that.
Exactly.
I never worked with a string quartet, let alone an orchestra, before I moved to LA. And all this happened later on. I ended up working with a big conductor and a big philharmonic orchestra down the line, which was something I never envisioned for myself because I was like, I didn't study music. I don't know nothing about that. But you just like step by step are eased into it. I was staying at this at the place of my friend Savannah, who became my friend. I wasn't friends with her when I moved there because I didn't know her. But I sort of moved in with her and I lived sort of in her studio at the beginning.
Nice.
Which was a nice setup just because it was a bed and a studio, all I needed. And she had a recording session where she recorded a quartet. And I just sort of heard it through the walls. I was like, what's that? What's going on? So I just sneaked up, played fly on the wall on her recording session, and I quizzed her afterwards about how that works, and because she brought in a recording engineer to record the whole thing. And I realized it's not something she does all by herself. She wrote the music parts, but she hired players, she hired a recording engineer. So I was like, okay, I can tap into that. I can tap into doing things that I never imagined for myself because they're done in a team. You just like have people that help you with that. And so I just started imagining different things for myself that I didn't imagine before,
That is so inspiring, man. For fellow artists and musicians who are going through a similar phase of transition, looking to reinvent themselves or dealing with feelings of self-doubt and fear in developing their craft, taking risks, what would your words of advice be?
Make sure your music can be heard, because you spend so much time with it, making it, and then you sort of release it into the world. It's almost like children. Again, I could come with a children analogy, although I don't even have children. But that's how I see it. You're like in labor, you give birth. It's like this intense process, and then your music is out there. And then you still want to kind of take care of it, that it's doing well in the world. And that's just something that's very hard to control, of course, because music as children have a life of their own, and you can't really control where they go once they're out there. But you can do your best to make sure that, almost like balloons that you put up that can be seen. So like put a little bit into promotion. I'm not just saying hire a PR agency or whatever, because these things change all the time. When blogs were important 10 years ago, now they're completely unimportant, and now it's all about Spotify playlists. So these things change almost every couple of years. But my advice would be just like stay in touch with also making sure your music can be heard and can be found, because these are the things that always have worked for me. I release a record on my own. I just invest a little bit of money that can be out there, can be discovered. And then sometimes years later, somebody connects and wants to license a song for a movie, or connects because that was an important record for him or her. Maybe you have an interesting conversation or a collaboration, who knows? It's just like all these synchronistic moments that happen when you take care of the music even after it came out.
Yeah, that sounds like, a very, very healthy approach. Thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
We're into the last 15 minutes. I do want to pick your brain on your current body of work, Foam and Sand. But just one last question, which is kind of related to this. That little story you just told us about being the fly on the wall, watching your roommate's string quartet coming to life.
Yeah.
That was like something you'd never done before.
Exactly.
And you were already a very established, well-known artist. What's your motivation or inspiration behind starting, learning a completely new skill from scratch? Because I feel like that's a muscle people tend to lose over the years while they keep doing the same thing. What's your secret to not losing that muscle?
Again, I circle back to just like the love for the unknown, which eventually led me to music, just like this whole kid that wants to discover something that it doesn't know much about. But then there's always fear too, because you're always like, and we talked about ego, there's like, oh man, you can't do that. You didn't train to do that. You haven't studied that, So like your thoughts put you back in your place and make you just hang out in your comfort zone and just stay put, more or less. But if you just don't give in to that, but explore and give into the curiosity that's also there. It's also a need, that we have to just explore and just like play and dabble in something, even if it's not something you're gonna succeed in necessarily, but at least you try it out. So I guess curiosity is something that always led me to new things, that I was genuinely impressed with a session where I played Fly on the Wall. I was like, this sounds so beautiful. I could already imagine how like a cello and a double bass, etc., would do really well in a song of mine. And I just imagined these things. So it's like almost like this kind of dreamy child again. I keep speaking about children a lot today. I don't know why. And I think that's a very healthy approach. Just like imagine things without this censor of your logical mind that tells you that that's not for you, Just like let your mind go free and go wild a little bit, Why not record with an orchestra, even though it's terrifying, And then once you entertain these thoughts, they become a little less intimidating. And then you just like find out about the technicalities. So what does it take to just like start with a quartet? You don't have to start with an orchestra right away, but who do you maybe know who plays violin? And you know what I mean? It's just like
absolutely
making it more approachable, start with something that's doable and then expand from there. I think expansion is something that comes to us naturally as humans because we evolve as a species. And I mean, look at what we've done. A lot of terrible things, but also we've done a lot of great things. And it always comes from the curiosity to not just sit on our ass and stay where we are, but venture out there and find out what else is there, So tap into this kind of curiosity would be my advice.
Amen to that, brother.
Cheers, man.
Foam and Sand, we're into the last 10 minutes, and that, like I said, I want to respect your time.
Appreciate that, man.
Thanks again for doing this, man. I've been reading up on some of the processes that you followed while making Foam and Sand. That's like a diagonal opposite to the kind of work you've been doing. It's all back to like minimal roots.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're spot on. It's also... how do I say this? My last record, The Next Billion Years, was very conceptual. I mean, the title, The Next Billion Years, it was about the long-term future of our species on this planet. It's all connected to this recording, which I found in a secondhand store from a Jacques Cousteau speech from the 70s, where he talks about the next billion years. And that just made me think, wow, the next billion years. I mean, we think about our own lifetime. We think about maybe the life of our children or grandchildren, but we don't think about time spans like that. So that really inspired me again to imagine like a long-term future and also creating a soundtrack for that. And it only seemed appropriate to work with an orchestra for that and make it almost like a soundtrack to an imaginary sci-fi film. So it was a very ambitious work. And now Form and Sand is pretty much the opposite, because it's like zero ambition in any conceptual way. It was literally just me in lockdown in the studio, needing to calm down my anxiety, which was, I think, something we all experienced at the beginning of the pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
Because nobody knew what the hell was going on.
Yeah.
So I just needed to sort of soothe and pamper my own anxiety. And I just gravitated towards these kind of tape loops, which were like hissy recordings of like my synthesizers recorded onto tapes, and old tapes, that is. So all these imperfections of an old tape, you know, when you listen to an old tape, like an old full Collins tape, if you will. Yeah. And it's kind of like wobbly a little bit. And that's sort of so soothing to me. Maybe that reminds me of my childhood, because I used to listen to a lot of tapes and they just got worn out and didn't sound very steady anymore after a while. But that's something that I find really pleasant. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Completely relate.
So I wanted to create something that gave me that sensation of like these unsteady, wobbly tape loops that sounded really warm, and I could slow down some piano recordings on tape and just experimented a lot, you know. So long story short, Form and Sand is a very intuitive project that's all about letting things bubble up and see what they are, and just like doing some sound design experiments. It's very free, you know. It's not conceptual. It's not very composed. If you listen to the things, they're usually like under 3 minutes, so they're more like snapshots. And the music teacher could probably say, well, that's just one idea you have there. You could probably introduce a new idea here and make a longer arrangement. But I didn't even mess with any of that. You know, it was just like, this feels complete. It's just for me. And then only eventually I started feeling like I wanted to share that. You know, I didn't conceive this project as even being a project. I just made it for myself. And then I realized it feels really good. Maybe I should share it. And that's why I started an Instagram account, not telling anyone it's me, and just leaking these things out. And they just got a life on their own and a following on their own. It's completely independent from Robert Koch. And then I realized, okay, I'm onto something here. And eventually, after a few singles that I just released under the radar, I decided to let the cat out of the bag, so to speak, and posted on social media about it. Hey guys, this is my new ambient project. You know, it came about last year and during lockdown, and yeah, people seem to really like it. So I'm happy to sometimes nurture that muscle that's just very unconceptual and unpredictable in a way. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. How long were you incognito?
So, I mean, I started pretty much during the first lockdown, which was April last year, I think. That's at least.
And were you in LA during the time, by the way, or Berlin? Okay.
And I made a lot of these circles, I call them. They're just like little tracks. I call them circle because they also loop if you want to. And I made, I don't know, like 30 or 40 of them because they just kind of bubbled out of me, you know. I didn't even know where they all came from.
Beautiful.
And then I just released a few of them as singles already in the year 2020, towards the end of 2020, and in the spring of 2021. And then I decided sort of in the summer this year to reveal the project officially.
Is it true you actually used a Walkman for the production?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I have an old Sony Walkman from the 80s, which I used to own when I was small, and I lost it or it broke, and then I found it again on eBay and I bought the same model again. And
wow.
Yeah, I just bought a lot of old secondhand tapes, you know, that have been recorded on many times. So they have the wobble and the texture and the hiss. And I just ran it through some pedals. I have this guitar pedal which does a nice chorus effect, which also gives it this bendy tonality similar to what like Boards of Canada have been doing, you know, when it sounds like a VHS tape that's going out of out of pitch a little bit. So just like gravitated towards these kind of sounds and ran the signal through different effects and re-recorded it back in half speed and these kind of things, you know.
Here's a last nerdy question. In an age where plugins and digital production tools have actually come to a point where you can almost pretty much, I mean, it's obviously a point of debate, but some would say you can't really hear the difference anymore between the digital simulation of and the actual hardware being used. Why did you choose to go with the hardware?
That's a good question. I think that's true. A lot of the digital stuff sounds very good, and I would not be able to tell the difference sometimes. But it's just like the process of working with things hands-on just gives you different ideas sometimes. That's just what I find, you know, because with a plugin you only noodle so much, because I mean you can map it all to your controller, of course, and these things are very intuitive nowadays. But still, if you're just like handling with real objects that you put in your hand and you twist knobs and you even like pull out the tape, you know what I mean? And maybe crumple it up a little bit.
Absolutely.
And rewind it and then just listen back how it sounds now. There's just something about the physicality that's just fun, I think, you know? And I don't think it sounds better. It's just a little more fun to engage with sometimes.
Also, I mean, I think one thing we've always all become acutely aware of since the pandemic is hashtag screen time.
For sure.
You know, I mean, I've gone off screen.
Good for you, man.
All the recording I do now is off screen. I have gone back to hard disk recording.
I wish that was true for me. I mean, even with Form and Send, I've spent a fair amount of time on the computer, because editing all these little experiments that I did and finding the good moments, you know, because a lot of it is improvisation. And then
brother, I wish I could say I've gone completely off screen. I mean, I wish. I'm looking forward to a day when that might be reality.
Right.
But at least for the recording part, at least I have an 8-track recorder.
Yeah.
And then I record my first solo piano album. Like, it's all improvised.
Beautiful, man.
Also under lockdown.
There you go.
Finally started having a listen to it, and I just couldn't take screens anymore after 90 Zoom calls a day and whatever. I was like, okay.
Oh my God. Yeah, I totally feel you.
I know, right?
And I do want to listen to that record. If you feel ready to share it, please send it along.
Oh, fuck yeah. I would love to. I mean, I would be honored. Absolutely. I'll send you a link ASAP. Where's the best way to find you online? Where would you like to direct our listeners to?
I'm not really on Facebook anymore, so I would say Instagram.
Good move.
Yeah, just like because that's where I hang out more. Because Facebook seems kind of dead. It's weird because I have like way more followers on Facebook than I do on Instagram. But it seems dead still. Even if I post something on Facebook, it's like crickets, you know?
I know. I hear it.
I don't know if anyone is still even using it.
I mean, when you say that, I don't even want to tell you what's going on with mine. Yeah, but FYI, we'll have all your links, by the way, on the episode notes. So please make sure for my listeners that you go check them out. It's been an absolute pleasure, man, reconnecting with you. Thanks so much for doing this.
Likewise.
And I sincerely hope that the next time we touch base is not almost a decade.
Yeah, let's make that a little shorter and in real life too, not just over the phone.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. I love that. FYI, before we taper off, though, you should know that encounter we'd had, like the hang I got to have with you during that little tour, that had a deep impact on my overall approach towards music. I really hit the shed, analyzed your approaches to music. I remember mailing you too, like trying to pick your brain. I still don't know how you make your production sound so big with so little. It is the mark of a master, and we all know that by now.
Oh man, it's not rocket science. It's just keeping at it. And you know, I was a terrible mixer. I was always in need for people to mix my songs and in need for people to help me with anything. I felt like I couldn't do anything myself. And it's just like learning by doing, just watching these people that helped me, that I paid to mix my songs, watch over their shoulder what they use. And I told you before, I was not educated in any way formally. I was just a music fan that just learns by doing it and just keeps at it. So that's something that's available to everyone, I think.
I gotta say, I've noticed a pattern. My favorite musicians, and I include you on this, are the ones who've been exempt from that whole institutionalized education thing.
Interesting.
I think it's at least, I mean, I can only speak for myself. Yeah. Needless to say, I'm not anti music education or anything.
No. But it's a good point you're making, because also my friend Savannah, who's the one that I observed doing the string recordings and who I collaborated with many times after that, she's from a music conservatory, and I can see how that of course, made her a master's violinist, but at the same time, how it, I'm not going to say constricts her thoughts about music, but she has to free herself from a lot of the conditioning she went through in the conservatory, and she talks about that too. So I feel like that's true for many people who go through formal education, and they sort of have to rediscover their love for music. Indeed. After all the rigid formulas that have been applied, you know.
Yeah, our last guest on this show was a lady called Vivian Ertz, a singer who used to be a clinical psychologist and then got a Fulbright scholarship and went to Berkeley and did that, and is now assistant for the Effortless Mastery Institute with Kenny Werner. I don't know if you know if you heard of him. The book Effortless Mastery. It's been a game changer for a lot of injured musicians, injured by the system, so to speak.
Okay.
And that conversation was also testimony to the baggage we kind of stand risk to. Strange note to end on, very strange note to end on, but
no, it's just one other interesting observation.
Indeed.
We could go on forever.
We could go on forever, and I remember we were having 5-hour-long conversations with you while being.
I know, and that was so enjoyable. I mean, let next time we just link in person and we just have some coffee or tea or whatever, and have some time and explore all of this a little more in depth.
I'm down. You got a deal, brother. On that note, gratitude from the bottom of my heart for listening to the very end. Please consider taking a minute to subscribe to our shows so you know when the next episode is out. This is a labor of love, one I hope snowballs into one that's sustainable in its attempt to support independent thought and authentic relating. And having you as a regular member of our audience is what makes that a realistic prospect. Much love, and talk soon. Just another voice out in